Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. I am here with Geeky Sparkles.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about comic books and money and a lack of money in comic books. This is
Shocker.
Shocker. This is kind of a follow-up to the video we did yesterday talking about why so many webcomic creators quit. And it usually isn't discussed with their readers so much as it's not worth putting up with a lot of the backlash if you're not getting paid. And it turns out that comic book creators current year are not getting paid. This was actually put out over the summer. And I would actually say they're overestimating how much.
I think it sounds high.
Yeah, how much the average comic book artist makes because it's
because it's average.
Average.
It's the average. You take the highs of the highs and the lows of the lows, and and then you average it. And I think there's not as many. You have a few highs of the highs. There's a lot of low of the lows, but it ends up being in the middle.
Most of the people who are making millions of dollars in comics aren't actually making millions of dollars in comics. They're making millions of dollars on comic adjacent businesses, whether it's Hollywood deals or merchandising. Todd McFarlane, who took his comic book fame when comics, you could make millions of dollars just selling comics, through the direct market, and he funneled that into creating multiple companies, toy companies, and stuff like that. Very smart. And that's kind of what you have to do if you really want to make a good living in comics. But we're going to talk about the numbers because there's been a lot of talk about it. And, I don't really feel right dunking on comic book creators on Twitter. We used to be like, why are you acting like this? Why are you saying stupid stuff like this? Unless it's really egregious, because here's the thing. Most of these people are not making very much money.
Yeah, but that doesn't give them a right to say shitty things.
No, but I'm saying I think they're cracking, and I think the reason that we're seeing so much vitriol toward people who actually are making livings in comics through crowdfunding or whatever is because they're like, shit, I'm going to be lucky if I break $25,000 this year, and that person just made it in an hour or less, So let's talk about this. Before we get into it any further, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. Over 276,000 subs. We do talk about the comic book industry, having worked in and around the comic book industry for a number of years, quitting the comic book industry because it didn't pay.
Yeah.
And now we're going back to publishing comics. Check it out. Crimson Red Volume 1 from Clownfish Studios. We're going to be in demand for about a month. I think we're going to do a couple of weeks on Kickstarter too, taking final orders, but almost $85,000. Just in book sales, all book sales. We didn't have any tiers that weren't physical copies.
I'm going to be working really hard to pack those.
You are. We'll get you some help.
My mom will help.
But this is actually more than we would have gotten, as an advance from a Scholastic or First Second. Considerably more. And in this case, this pays back because we actually fronted the costs to pay our artist. And
we already paid for it ahead.
It's already paid for. It'll pay for the printing, and it'll put money toward the next book, the second part. So we know
the artist can get started in the second book.
He can get started on the second book, and he did a great job, by the way. He did a very good job. It's probably, now I know Jose actually had done books for First Second. I'm not sure what his deal was, but I would like to think that we probably paid him more than they paid him.
Yeah.
Because First Second's deals aren't very good. So most indie publishers' deals are not very good. But this was Cron.com a couple months ago. They're talking about what the average salary is like. And I'm going to go out to ComicsBeat because it's one thing I will give, regardless of where Heidi McDonald is at politically, she does put up articles talking numbers.
I don't even care about where people are politically. I just want to know what the truth of the matter is, what the actual facts of the situation are. Whether you lean right or left, it's irrelevant to me. I don't give a shit. I just want to know what happened.
So the median comic book artist monthly salary is around $3,500 or $42,000 per year, according to Salary.com. Now that
no.
I'm going to say that is high for, believe it or not, most people are sitting there laughing like, what? I'm like, no, I'm going to say that's high based on some of the rates I'm privy to and some of the rates I've gotten, unless you're like a top shelf Marvel DC creator. Annual earnings typically range somewhere between $28,000 and $59,000. Salaried workers, this is what's scary. Salaried workers and freelancers can expect similar levels of compensation. Comic artist salaries at Marvel, for example, were $32,000 a year, according to
$32,000 a year at Marvel.
So that seems low. It depends on what you're working on. But then the flip side is you're seeing then pull a lot of artists from like Tumblr and webcomics and stuff like that, and they're probably working cheaper. I know that they've frozen the page rates over there, so that probably is pretty accurate. I mean, I would say for at least like a lower end or mid-tier artist. I mean, if you're working on one of the X books, I'd like to think you're making a lot more money.
Well, they're saying for comic artists, the median was $3,500. So that's not. I mean, that's not a big range. 35 to 42,000.
That's not good.
But that seems high, though. I mean,
it does seem high. Okay, because I want to talk about this because this is an article that they keep bringing this up because very few people are candid with what they make in comics. I think they're embarrassed by it. The only time it comes up is like when you find people bitching about page rates other people are getting or people aren't getting paid. Then you start to find out that, oh shit, they're not getting paid very much. And then what's really weird is you find out that they're not getting paid very much, and then the publishers that are massively underpaying them can't even pay them on time.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So that's what's really like IDW's page rates are absolutely ghetto, but they have had multiple instances where they were not paying people on time.
Yes.
They couldn't even pay that. So this is coming from The Beat. They talked about David Harper and Brian Chirilla. They talked about what, I think I don't know if he quit comics or what, but he said that the fiscal reality was awful. It turned out that he was only making, and I love this because he actually breaks it down.
That's when we quit doing comics all the time.
Oh yeah.
Because you didn't get paid much.
Yeah. So you want to be a comic book artist. Here's some sobering information. This is all the work he did. As a full-time comic artist, this is the expected output, more or less, not to say I haven't done a ton of work on the side. It was 12 issues, 264 pages, and 4 covers. For that, gross pay over the year, in addition to those 4 covers, was $33,000. After taxes, $24,000. That's $2,000 a month. Again, I do a lot of work on the side to make ends meet. Nearly all of that aforementioned salary goes to the mortgage, and so the majority of the financial responsibility falls on my wife.
We talked about that before.
Well, yeah, we're gonna talk about that. But here's what the schedule's like: 7 a.m. wake up, 8:30 take the kids to school, 9:30 start work. 3 o'clock you're done. 3 o'clock in the morning you're up at.
Well, that's
7.
kind of how you used to do it. Yeah, here's the thing though. It depends on where you live too. I'm sorry, living in Portland, you're definitely gonna need a lot more money to live than somebody living in, another area that might not be so ridiculously expensive.
Yeah, that's the thing too, because a lot of, and this is part of the problem too with, comics kind of being, up until recently, being sort of centralized in major metropolitan areas, is didn't pay very much, but you had to live in New York or LA or Portland or Seattle or, some expensive city. Now, with the advent of the internet, you can live someplace else and live a lot cheaper as long as they're okay with you phoning it in, basically. But back in the day, it was relatively uncommon for, it wasn't possible. There were cases of artists doing it, but for the most part, like, you had to live in the New York area, New York, New Jersey, something, so you could go to the office when they wanted you to go to the office, even though you were a freelancer. But they also, relatively speaking, paid a hell of a lot more then.
Well, I was going to say, this was from a few years ago, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the rates went up.
They haven't gone up.
A lot of times they haven't gone up. They've gone up very little.
So, funny you mentioned that, because that segues into this other.
Oh, I didn't even know where you were going with that.
Yeah. Is it possible to have a career in comics without a second income? Yeah, but not through the direct market, I don't think. Well,
yeah, and you have to understand you probably have like about 10 roommates.
Yeah. And look, I mean, people dunk on comic book artists having a bunch of roommates, eating cat food, yada, yada, yada.
I hope they're not eating cat food.
I hope they're not eating cat food either. Ramen, maybe. But, I mean, ramen. Look, there was somebody that we were pretty good friends with that worked for even, it was a digital comics upstart. I'm not going to name names or anything. This person actually had a pedigree, came from a major publisher, and was sharing an apartment in the city with like 2 other couples and telling me about that and how little they made. And I'm like, my God, like, I make more than that working my day job, living in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And you're making what you're making, living in a city by necessity, to be able to say, hey, I work in comics.
Yeah.
Like, what? What are you doing? What are you doing? So yeah, this is Joshua Dysart. said, truth for you, almost every single person who got their start in comics from my generation and from most others too had some kind of supplemental income. Many people who appear successful today are either being subsidized by a spouse, family money, or some other means.
I've been saying it for years. We've mentioned it on podcast, on our podcast back in the day, and videos we've done previously for years now. That a lot of people are like, I'm full-time, whatever, and then you find out that their spouse is like a doctor or a nurse or a teacher or something, and they make a lot of money. Well, teachers don't make a lot of money, but that's not our story.
Well, yeah, teachers, it looks like mad money compared to what some comics people are making. 2 friends let me move in with them. They're 2 kids, 2 dogs, and 2 cats for a couple of years while I worked to get a foothold in comics. This is Christopher Sabella. I definitely wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for that unrepayable act of friendship. I had a full-time job while working in comics for longer than I'd have liked. This is Jody Hauser. Yes, as in working 16, 18 hours a day. Yes, I did. Thanks to living in a state with good health care and my dad saying he'd help with insurance if I got in trouble, I'm just doing comics full-time. So that was the situation I was in. Yeah. I, at first, was working mostly on licensed comics, mostly Disney comics, but I had a day job. I actually worked in tech. It was actually it was a pretty stable job. It was a tech company that was being bankrolled by the government, so it wasn't going away. But yeah, I would get up at 6:30, go into work, come home, see you and the kids, their babies at the time, briefly, and then I was at the computer until like 2-3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, that went on for years,
and it sucked.
It did. And the thing is, and I actually am a teacher, but I wasn't working as a teacher then because I was taking care of the kids. And honestly, they're not wrong about daycare. The price of daycare per kid here is similar. I guess it's pretty much universal. It's insane. And it would be, for what I'd make, it was just better for me to stay home. It wasn't going to make a difference. So. Yeah,
because look, to be real, it's a lot of people who work in comics, a lot of them don't even have kids because they can't afford.
I relate to this so much. They didn't want to work a 9-to-5 job. Now I work 24/7.
Pretty much.
I relate to that so much.
But we have health insurance. So there's that.
We have to pay for ourselves.
We have to pay out of pocket for it. Yeah. It's hard. Look, it is hard. And I get that there are some people on Twitter that are salty, that are angry at YouTubers, that are angry at people that they probably feel maybe took a shortcut. I get that. I think the difference, that resentment, I think, has always kind of been there in comics. I think the difference is we have social media now.
People did really well on a crowdfunder, and they think they took a shortcut. That's kind of shit because it's not their fault that you guys took the long way around.
The market determines.
And maybe if you weren't maybe you were making books that sold, people wouldn't be kicking your ass with things people actually wanted to buy. That's
the problem. A lot of people who are working in comics, and this is kind of the same with webcomics too. It's like, they make the stuff they want to make, which is fine. That's how creators create stuff. But then a lot of times they're not making what the market actually wants. And if you're doing some really like avant-garde indie book that only appeals to 100 people, don't be shocked if you only sell 100 copies and you can't pay your rent. Yeah, I'm not being derogatory. This is what gets me too. We have always been straight shooters. We've always talked this way. We used to get invited to conventions and stuff, and they have us talk about, digital comics and the business side of things, whatever. And we have told people repeatedly that the only reason things worked out for us was because we had other means of income. We had a day job.
A lot of people get book deals have day jobs. It's just the way it is. I'm sorry to tell you if you want, anything different, but we've been telling you this.
Yeah, people that write, the difference between, prose writer and the advances are about the same. Actually, I think they're less for graphic novels, but prose writer, it's usually not as time consuming to write a prose book as it is to write and draw a comic book. But I can think of so many examples of people that they hold up as like, look, these are the people that made it in comics. And I'm like, yes, and I know that their spouse was a nurse, and their spouse was a doctor, and this one was married to a teacher, and this one, their family was rich. This one, even Don Rosa, who I had the pleasure of working on his stuff for a number of years. He had a family business. He had a lumber, or he had a construction supply company, and he noped out of the family business and he started doing duck comics. Now, most of his money comes from overseas because he sells a ridiculous amount of books overseas. But again, it was one of those things where it wasn't like, you know, he just kind of woke up one day and said, yep, I'm going to do comics and I have no money and I'm going to, you know, it was like, no, he already kind of had, you know, the means to do it. And unfortunately, that is the case. It's not, for most people, it's not a very lucrative career. It can be. And I think things are changing. I think even with, you know, people try to dunk on crowdfunding and they try to dunk on the numbers like, well, yeah, you're selling, you know, 1,200 books versus, you know, 12,000 books. I'm like, we're probably making more money and our artists are making more money, even though we're selling fewer books. And I would love to sell 12,000 books, but and maybe someday we will sell 12,000 books. But for now, I'm like, this is still a better deal than we would have gotten working in the mainstream, doing webcomics for free and hoping people put money in the tip jar. You know, I mean, it just is. It's a better way to go. So I would tell you, if you want to make comics and you want to break into comics, at this point in time, I wouldn't even waste your time trying to break into Marvel or DC. I would try to build an audience online and get them to buy your books directly. And if they want to come to you at some point in time, you've got a little bit of bargaining power. You can say, look, I did a couple $100,000 in crowdfunding. Page rate has to come up. You know? So anyway, we're going to wrap this up. All right. So please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. We'll talk later.
Bye.